thank you so much for giving us the opportunity at the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative, the best organization you've never heard of, to partner on this conference. We had the pleasure of co-creating yesterday's Feminist Foreign Policy Day, which was great. And hopefully you heard from some of our coalition members in that afternoon session, as well as we're deeply grateful to those of you who went to the Hill and were pushing on our resolution calling for a feminist foreign policy in the United States yesterday. Thank you for that help. Yeah, why not us? Why not us? So we're just very grateful for this, and also very grateful for the childcare. Shout out to that in all the years of feminist conferencing. I think this is the first time I've had childcare, so thank you. That's amazing to have my daughter here with us. So what do we do at the collaborative? Polling suggests that Americans think we spend roughly 25% of the federal budget on foreign affairs. Does anyone want to guess how much we actually spend? Did I hear one? That's one of my coalition members, I imagine. Yes, 1%. Yes, well done. Yes, not even a coalition member. Thank you. And so there's this sense in America that the government's doing far too much for everyone over there and not nearly enough for me right here at home. And that last bit is definitely true. We should be doing more. See childcare. But the first part about how the US shows up in the world and what we're doing to promote peace, equality, justice, that we've got a bit of work to do. As COVID and conflict and climate chaos have shown us, our most pressing challenges of the day do not observe traditional borders. And our shared threat level is rising, like our sea levels. As feminists, we know that the only way forward is by rising up together. Those of you who joined us yesterday to learn about a newish field called feminist foreign policy and a new way of thinking about how we show up in the world in a more solidarity-based approach, learned about some of our thinking here. We're about reconceptualizing the national interest around common global goods, people, peace, and planet. Now, that's a big departure from traditional foreign policy, which has been about power over, the assertion of either military or economic might over other lands, peoples, races, religions, a very acquisitive proposition, raping and pillaging and plundering the building or scaling of walls. Our vision for feminist foreign policy is about building bridges, about using the levers of power within foreign policy to include, to recenter around common values, and a more shared vision of a more feminist future in which everyone's basic needs are met, the promotion of human and planetary flourishing, power together, and powering through. Sounds Pollyanna, right? That's never going to happen in Washington. Wrong. More governments than ever before are taking this approach. This includes both of our neighbors, and now a total of 16 governments who have announced their foreign policy is explicitly feminist. And it's interesting to reflect this year. My team and I are just putting the finishing touches on a paper that will launch on Friday. If you're still in town, we'd love to have you. The Americas is really the region to watch. And as we think together today about backlash and about the kinds of organized forces that are trying to wind the clock backwards on our rights, we have a lot to learn from the Americas. The Green Wave has swept through the region, liberalizing abortion laws, advancing trans rights, and this is definitely had an impact now on foreign policy. I think the paper will go over this in more detail, but Argentina has the first trans woman in an ambassador role who is working with their ambassador for feminist foreign policy, and they just hosted their first regional convening on feminist foreign policy last week, including Argentina, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil, who I would characterize as feminist foreign policy curious. Germany is decolonizing aid, and we have German feminists here who can tell you more about that. The Netherlands is spending more than any country in the world on women's rights movements and organizations. Spain and France have endowed official advisory councils of feminist activists to advise them on how they are doing on walking the talk. And most recently, Liberia joined Libya as the second country on the African continent, and Mongolia the first in the Asia region. All of these governments are organizing at the UN next week. It's our big high-level week. There will be heads of state and foreign ministers. And for the first time, they are working together. Now that this is a diverse enough caucus, 5 out of 6 UN regions, they are working to disrupt and to fight against the so-called family caucus at the UN that, if you ask me, is doing more to destroy families than to defend them. So there will be, for the first time, a political declaration talking about the power of feminist foreign policy and of this values-based, solidarity-based policymaking as what we believe the only possibility for our future. So we find ourselves in Washington. We have to ask, what possibility for a US feminist foreign policy? If it's good enough for both of our neighbors, why not us? What would it look like if the guiding principles of people, peace, and planet did actually chart the course for American foreign policy? And how is the Biden administration doing in pursuit of that goal? We in the Coalition for a Feminist Foreign Policy in the United States are now more than 80 organizations strong, and our strength really is in our diversity. We represent women's rights, queer groups, climate groups, nuclear policy experts, immigration policy, democracy groups, human rights groups, feminist funders, and more. And we've worked with feminists in Congress to draft and introduce that resolution that you were pushing for yesterday. Thank you. You know, I think it's an uphill battle. And Caitlin Horrigan at Planned Parenthood, one of our coalition members yesterday, said our orientation is toward a more feminist foreign policy. We're very clear-eyed about all of the ways in which the U.S. is, by some measures, actually dead last on ICRW's Feminist Foreign Policy Index. But we believe in the power of feminist movements. We believe in the power of feminist organizing. And if this sounds like a vision for the future that you share, we invite you to join us, to become a member, to ask your member of Congress why the US doesn't have a feminist foreign policy, and as you are funders, to fund us. If you fund climate justice in the United States, fund our climate and gender justice lead on foreign policy, the Women's Environment and Development Organization, which is organizing Indigenous and women's rights activists at COP, the climate conferences. If you fund reproductive justice here, support FOS Feminista or IPAS or the Global Justice Center and their efforts to advance and defend these rights on the global stage. If you fund Black feminisms, fund Femnet, the Pan-African feminist network that is speaking truth to power at the IMF and the World Bank and saying what debt deals are doing to African women and families. Sorry, she just lost her mother, that's why she's not here, so I'm getting a little emotional about that. As the proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. These are just a few of the incredible organizations that are fighting with us every day for a more feminist future for the United States and the world. We invite you to join us, and thank you.
Thank you, Lyric. Please join me in welcoming to the stage for our next Spark Talk, Saida Agostini-Bostic, President of Funders for LGBTQ Issues.
I want to thank Elizabeth and the WFN for making me realize one of my dreams, which is to pretend to do a TED Talk, so thank you. My name is Saida Agostini-Bostic. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and it is truly an honor to be with you all today. I want to talk to y'all about hope and what it means for philanthropy to practice a disciplined hope in this moment. I want to acknowledge that it feels really weird to talk about a time when we're witnessing such virulent attacks against queer and trans folks, people of color, immigrants, and so many others. I would be lying to tell you that I didn't wake up incredibly scared this morning like I do every morning. And I know I'm not the only one. I want to say for context here that along with being a fat black queer femme, the daughter of Guyanese immigrants, a poet, and a survivor of child sexual abuse, that I am a social worker hippie with really great shoes who is deeply obsessed with Luther Vandross. So in addition to thinking about how Wait for Love is possibly the greatest song known to humankind, thank you, we know it's true, I think a lot about trauma and how it is a deeply ingrained biological coping mechanism to simply disassociate in the times when we feel that our rights and our lives are under attack. It's a normal human reaction to abnormal conditions. I think a lot about the journeys that it took my people to get here, how many conditions each of us in this room have survived. The journeys all of our ancestors and elders took to get us here into this room, and when I look at each of you, I see those journeys, the stunning fashions, and most importantly, I see the love shining out of each of you. That love is power. I am the daughter of survivors, of people who made a way out of love and said, we have a right to be here. What I think about is that regardless of the fear that we hold in this time, and it is a big and real and weighty fear, our mandate in this moment is not to shy away from the work. This past year, the ACLU tracked over 500 anti-LGBTQ bills, many targeting trans and gender nonconforming youth and drag performers. There are parts of this country where teachers cannot talk about enslavement, and doctors cannot provide medical care for fear of being fired or imprisoned. There are parts of this country where folks are waging GoFundMes because their families are no longer safe where they live. And they know if they stay there, they're at risk of losing their children, their jobs, and their homes. And what I want to say is that as philanthropy, we can't look away. That is our mandate. We have to remember the O'Shea Sibleys, the Banco Browns, the communities fighting all over this country, not just for their lives, but the lives of each and every single one of us in this room. And to remember that we have everything we need to create the world we so desperately deserve. If we are using hope as a discipline, it means asking ourselves how we will show up and fight today. How will we use the power of our positions and institutions to show up like we know that our mutual survival and well-being depends on each other? To show up like we know we will win. I'm gonna say that again. To show up like we know we will win. So I'm going to close with the words of one of my favorite poets, Essex Hemphill, right? And this poem is really dear to me because after Trump's election, I basically hid under my bed. And my friends were like, Saida, you have to work. There's a thing called rent. You need to pay it. And one of my dear friends, Priyank, sent me this poem, American Wedding. And this stanza is one that I read every day. I hope it offers you the same hope that it offers me. And as we move through the rest of the day and we think about what does it mean for us to think about in 5 years, when we ask ourselves, did we do enough? Did we do everything we could? I hope this is what moves you forward. They don't know we need each other critically. They expect us to call in sick, watch television all night, die by our own hands. They don't know we are becoming powerful. Every time we kiss, we confirm the new world coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Saida. Up next, we have, for our last Spark Talk, Ofa-Ki-Levuka L, who is the strategic leader and advisor at the Women and Children's Crisis Center. Ofa.
Nina Simone, I wish I could be free. That particular performance of Nina Simone's is from a live performance she made in 1976 in Montreux, Switzerland. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the chains binding me. I wish I could say all the things that I could say when I'm relaxed. I'd be starting anew. The actual lyrics that you will hear in her other performances or that you will find online slightly deviates, and you're probably more familiar with the lyrics, I wish I could say all the things that I could say them loud, say them clear, for the whole round world to hear. But what I like from Simone's 1976 live performance is that slight deviation. I wish I could say all the things that I can say when I'm relaxed. I'd be starting anew. So let me take from Simone's slight deviation in 1976 and use this as the spark or the energy of my talk this morning. I'm going to use this space to say all the things I wish I could say when I'm relaxed, with the purpose of taking us to a place of questioning, of deep thinking, of critical analysis, and dare I say, starting anew. It was around about the time of Simone's 1976 performance that the world was starting to see massive watershed legal moments. In the US in particular, 1973 Roe versus Wade, this had a huge impact on the fight, not just in America, for reproductive rights across the world. And at the global level, 1975, the First World Conference of Women held in Mexico, which was the key foundation and driver to the establishment of the Beijing Platform for Action that we all use as global guidelines to achieving gender equality and gender equity. 1979, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women was adopted by the General Assembly, later becoming an international treaty. So the 1970s seemed like the decade that shit really started to pick up and build in momentum around women's rights and gender equality globally. Cut forward to 5 decades later, we have found ourselves back in the strain of Nina Simone's yearning, I wish I could be free. What has happened? What the heck has happened? With that said, and feeling relaxed this morning to say what I have to say, I have some key questions that I'm going to ask the room to critically reflect on, not just this morning, but as we move forward in our fight to achieve gender equity and women's human rights all over the world over the next few decades. The questions are somewhat tied to the elephant in the room. And the elephant that I'm talking about, who owns feminism? Or who does feminism belong to right now? Not the concept. I'm talking about specifically the word feminism as a label. Because to really fully engage in the concept and the practice of feminism, you need to get over the basic concept, the basic label of feminism. The concept of feminism is the key tool in achieving gender equality, gender equity, and women's rights. It's a way for us to collectively and actively smash patriarchy and transform systems of oppression. So the concept is on point. We all get it, right? So it shouldn't have been a problem. We should not have seen what had happened in America happen with Roe versus Wade, affirmative action. There was so much work, and on giants, the shoulders of giants of who we stand on today, who did all the groundwork to get us to the point that we got to in the 70s, and then some in the decades that followed. But here we are. At a time in our history that we are faced with the backlash against women's rights in terms of safety, financial freedom, and reproductive rights. Second question, how have we as feminists, those of us who claim feminism, failed our women in all their diversities? Not just asking our governments how have they failed us, asking ourselves how have we as feminists failed the women in our communities, in our countries, in our regions, and globally. There's a huge crisis with feminism right now. One of the key drivers that feminism is heavily dependent on is solidarity. You would think that the momentum pre-1970s and what we saw happen in the 70s was the stepping stones to bigger and better achievements for women's rights, particularly around legal frameworks. And here is my statement as I begin to end. We have allowed the development and humanitarian nexus to dictate the way we as feminists have not been able to collectively organize ourselves as feminists over the last 5 decades. We have been pushed into working into silos in terms of the big development goals around gender equality. If you're working on gender-based violence, stick to that area. If you're working on women's economic empowerment, just stick to that. If you're working on the climate crisis or women in decision-making, increasing the number of women in politics, specifically, just stick to that. National funding, the majority of national funding and regional funding does not fund movement building, more so feminist movement building. Investing in women's consciousness awareness raising and that fire in our bellies has diminished over the last 3 decades. It's almost disappeared. We are at risk of finding ourselves again with the word feminism being very much a white woman's tool. We haven't educated our daughters, our granddaughters, nieces, the young girls and women in our communities about the fight. We haven't contextualized feminism as a tool. We have failed to continue building momentum around solidarity nationally and globally. Key example from the Pacific, we have failed our sisters in West Papua, we've been focusing in our silos across the last 2 decades and failed to recognize the suffering that they are experiencing day in, day out under the oppression that they are right now. So there's an urgency. And I dare to say, we can't just rise anymore. We need to soar. And I finish with Nina Simone's words. Well, I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. Oh, I'd soar to the sun and I'd look down at the sea. Then I'd sing, because then I know how it feels to be free. Let's soar.
Please join me in giving a round of applause, another round of applause for amazing speakers, Lyric, Saida, and Ofa. Thank you.